We're halfway through. Can you believe we're halfway through the Painting the Wilderness Challenge? And today I'm going to paint something that I was terrified to paint until a couple years ago, the ocean. We're going to paint a beginner friendly, quiet seas scene, and I can't wait to show you what's coming. Welcome to day 6, my friend. I am so excited for today. Yesterday, we had a bit of a challenge, right, with the rocky waterfall. And today, I'm going to take it a little bit easier with a nice, quiet seas scene. Hopefully, this one will kind of give you a little breather before we move on to other projects in this challenge. As a reminder, I'm giving away a copy a day of my book. So if you want to win a copy of my book, please watch to the end of the video to find out how to enter. So I prepped my watercolor notebook by putting washi tape on all four edges and keeping the paper even more taut with some binder clips. And then I just washed off some of my palette there so I can have some clean spaces to mix. I'm also, as you're seeing, kind of just pushing on the edges of the washi tape to make sure that it has adhered to the paper. That's just to prevent leakage as much as possible. Sometimes little holes pop up in the washi tape and the paint can leak under it. So that will happen. There's no way to like 100% prevent that, but that's just one step that I take to try to mitigate that risk. So for this sky, we're going to take it in layers. The first layer is going to be an orange, like an orange sunset glow along the bottom third of the sky. So the sky is going to be a gradient between a dark, dark blue and then this light orange because we're capturing the night sky at moonrise, right? Like right when the sunset is just ending and the moon is starting to come out. So I'm trying to get like a nice yellow orange, and to do that, I mixed yellow ochre with opera pink and some carmine. I didn't quite get the yellow orange that I think that I wanted, but we're going for it anyway. Um, and in this gradient, the orange is going to be more vibrant along the horizon. So that means orange will be at the bottom. And then I'm also blending in just some straight yellow ochre at the top. Notice how none of these colors right now are super, super vibrant. They're all pretty light still, meaning they're pretty watery. And that's just so I can keep blending them in nice, subtle blends. Also note that I try as much as possible to paint from light to dark. I That's because I want to keep the yellow yellow. And so I don't want the orange to overtake that yellow. So that's a general watercolor rule, paint from light to dark. So I let that layer dry and then completely, and then I re-wet with clean water. And now I'm putting a layer of Payne's gray right on top. Now, I'm not going to take the Payne's gray all the way to the bottom because then the Payne's gray would cover up the orange, right? And in fact, it probably would cover up the orange and kind of blend a little bit to make it kind of a muddy mix. So I want to maintain the orange and the yellow glow coming from the previous layer. So in order to do that, I'm mostly putting the paint on the top of the sky, and then I'm using water to bring the paint down in a nice gradual gradient. To get that gradual gradient, I'm just doing slow edge to edge strokes. Now, in this layer, I'm also going to brighten up the previous layer. So I'm going to add some more of that orange, some more of that yellow, and as we're kind of mixing these colors together, it's important to note that blue and orange are complementary colors, which means that when they mix together, it's not pretty. So, in order to get this gradient of orange to blue, we need to use a lot of water. So, we have that nice white space. And we need to remember our rule, right, of painting light to dark. When I'm bringing down that blue, I'm not going to bring it down too much because if I do, it can overtake everything. And so I want to bring it down just enough and then wash off my brush and then start painting again from light to dark. If you find that too much of your blue is going into the orange or that your yellow is getting overtaken by the blue, you can take a clean paintbrush and just kind of lift some of the blue and then add more pigment as you need. So I'm going to let that layer dry. and then re-wet, lots of layers to get this vibrance and to get this depth here. I'm gonna re-wet and add another layer of dark Payne's gray just at the top of the sky. And this time, I'm not going to add any more orange and yellow. I'm just adding some Payne's gray there. And then I'm taking some Prussian blue and I'm going to start with the base layer of the sea. So for the base layer of the sea, we're using the wet on wet technique, and I'm just going to paint kind of loose zigzags of this Prussian blue. I want to intentionally leave behind some white space. And I want it to be this kind of nice, subtle, flowing wave effect. So that's just the base layer. I let that dry, and now I'm going to go back in with Payne's Gray, and I want the horizon to be a pretty crisp line. And so that's why I'm starting with the wet on dry technique. So the paper is dry when I painted that first stroke. But then immediately after, I'm going in with clean water and blending it down in kind of like feathering it down into the ocean. It's okay if it doesn't go all the way down. I'm actually intentionally leaving behind like some parts of dry space just for added texture. The strokes that I'm using here are a lot of zigzag strokes, a lot of loose, just kind of back and forth horizontal strokes. And then I let that layer dry. And now I'm adding another wet on dry layer. This time I'm using my size 2 brush because this is where we're going to add kind of the subtle waves. The thing about waves on the ocean is they are tricky. I think the ocean is the thing I was the most scared to paint of everything. And really, it didn't click for me until I realized that, duh, just like everything in watercolor, you can break down the ocean into multiple layers. So we did that base layer, and then we did like another layer to add some more color. And now we're doing another texture layer where we're just adding a little bit of details, doing that kind of zigzag, horizontal strokes with very light paint. Most of the time, this paint is pretty light, and we're just adding these subtle waves along the ocean. Like again, most everything that I paint, I'm not going at it thinking this is exactly where I want this wave to go. I am just kind of letting my hand do move in that motion that I know that waves typically move in, which is that kind of zigzag, side to side um, stroke, but in a random kind of scumbling way. Scumbling is a technique we practiced in day one for the first night sky. If you need a refresher, basically it just means random marks, random movements across the paper. No rhyme or reason, just knowing that the ocean, like everything in the natural world, is imperfect. So the way to capture the raw emotion and power of the ocean is to let my hand also be imperfect and just kind of rock and roll across the page using very light paint just to add that subtle texture to mimic the rolling waves on top of the ocean. And also, as a reminder, I am a loose watercolor artist. So, to some extent, I try to get it to look, kind of realistic, but for the most part, it's okay if it does not look like it actually does in the natural world because I am looking to capture feelings. And more than that, I'm looking to have experiences. I'm looking for the magic that I feel when I see a scene unfolding right before my eyes, and the peace that I feel as the brush is brushing across the paper. The end result of this project is really just kind of a byproduct. So, now I'm going in with the second wet on dry layer for the waves with a little bit darker Payne's gray. It's not very, very dark. It's still fairly light, which means fairly watery, but it is a little bit darker than the other ones. And because it's darker, I'm not going to add nearly as much of this layer as I have on the other layers. That's because as we paint light to dark, right? Generally, if you're painting light to dark layers, the dark layers should, in order to maintain a contrast, you only want a few of them. You don't want the dark to overtake everything. So we're finished with the ocean, and now I'm going to finish off this scene with a moon. I started out thinking I wanted to paint a crescent moon, and then I changed my mind because I didn't like how my crescent came out. So I'm using white gouache here, And if you don't have gouache, you can use a white gel pen would probably work here. If you have white acrylic, it would definitely work here. Just any kind of opaque white thing, white paint will do it. And your circle doesn't have to be perfect. Mine certainly wasn't. But once you're finished with your moon, you're done. That's it. I told you it was a pretty simple one today. I wanted us to be able to just kind of relax, learn a new skill. Hopefully, learning to paint the ocean in layers is something that, maybe you've learned something new, but also in a very gentle, relaxing kind of way. I really wish that I could be transported to that scene right now. It looks absolutely beautiful, if I do say so myself. So, now to my favorite part. Let's talk about what we've loved and what we've learned with this quiet sea scene. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos, this is my favorite way to end any painting project, really, because I used to get really down on myself for my quote failures. But I have since learned that failures are really just opportunities for you to learn and to grow. And so I like to come away from every single painting thinking about how I've grown and how I've really loved my experience. So, things that I loved. I really loved the moon. I loved the contrast and I liked that it was centered. I don't usually go for centered things. I usually go for off center, but it was good. I loved the gradient that I got, that complementary gradient. Um, Complementary colors don't blend well, but when you can contrast them, they can create some bold and fun blends. Some things that I learned. I wish that my waves were a little more horizontal. I think they got a little, they kind of made like circles or diamonds or something. It wasn't quite the shape that I wanted, but it was okay. I think I also learned that I wanted the sky to go down a little bit further. And, I think in order to make the gradient a little bit more smooth, that's what I needed to do to make the blue go down just a little bit further. But all in all, it was a such a fun thing. And a reminder, if you want to win a copy of my book, leave a comment below and I'll see you next time.